Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Ashutosh and welcome to another video of this biomechanics series. And in this video, we are going to understand a very interesting topic, which is stability and mobility function of muscle. How muscles are going to provide the stability and mobility in our body, we will be seeing that in the coming lecture. Now, before starting today's lecture, we must understand what is the role of muscles in our body. Muscles are having two very important roles in our body. First is to control the posture. Right now I am sitting on this chair and I am able to control my posture. I am neither falling on the right side nor on the left side. I am neither swaying on the either direction, which means that I am able to control my posture. This is happening because my muscles are contracting, like my agonist and antagonist muscles. These are the group of muscles which are having a specific action in regards to the movement. They are contracting and providing the stability. What are agonist and antagonist muscles? We will be understanding them in the next lecture. Now, movement. Muscles also facilitate the movement. If I want to do an action, for example, if I want to lift this mobile phone, which means that I have to lift my hand and grab this object and then I have to lift it again, which means that muscles has to produce the force. Thus this force will be transmitted then to the bones and then I will be able to lift the mobile. So remember, muscles have two very important functions. First is to control the posture and another one is to facilitate the movement of bones. Before understanding much more about the functioning of these muscles, we must know the simple anatomy of these muscles. We will start that by understanding the shapes of the muscles. So there are muscles in our body with varying shapes. There are different shapes of muscles available in our body with different purposes. Every shape of the muscle has different orientation of their muscle fibers. So you will see that every muscle shape that we are going to study, they will have a peculiar orientation of the muscle fibers, which will be helping in performing a movement. So let's start first by understanding what is a fusiform muscle. So this is a fusiform muscle, and the classic example of fusiform muscle is biceps brachii. So here you can see this is the muscle belly which is situated between the two tendons and the fibers are oriented parallel to the tendon. Here muscle fibers are oriented parallel to the direction of the tendon. This is special about these fusiform muscles. Now there is a muscle type which is known as a parallel muscle type. In this muscle type, there is a tendon which is present between the belly, and this type of muscle type muscle shape you can see in rectus abdominis muscle. Now there is a muscle which is known as pectoralis major. It is a convergent type of muscle, which means all the muscle fibers come from the various directions and they insert at a tendon. They converge at a tendon and that tendon will attach to the bone. And the classic example of this convergent type of muscle is pectoralis major. Then there are pinnate muscles. Pinnate actually means feather. So whenever I will say pinnate, it means that structure is actually resembling like the feather of a bird. So here you can see this is a unipinnate muscle. Unipinnate muscle means this is a central tendon and the fibers are coming obliquely and attaching to this central tendon only from one direction. And then there is a muscle which is known as bipinnate muscle, which means the fibers are coming obliquely from both the directions and then they are inserting at the central tendon. The example of unipinnate muscle is palmar interosseous muscle and the example of this bipinnate muscle is rectus femoris. Now there is also one multipinnate muscle. Multipinnate muscles have various central tendons and within these central tendons the fibers come from both the sides in oblique manner and get inserted at the central tendon. They are having multiple pinnates, multiple feather-like structures. And the classic example of multipinnate muscle is your deltoid muscle. So here you can see there is anterior fiber, there is middle fiber, and then there is posterior fiber. So deltoid is a classic example for the multipinnate muscles, as there are so many pinnas present over here, and the fibers are oriented obliquely in regard with the central tendon. Now there is also a muscle type, muscle shape, which is circular. Circular muscle you can see in orbicularis oculi. This is a classic example of circular muscles. These are the eye muscles which helps in the movement of eye. I hope you are clear with the basic structures or the shape of a muscle. How does a muscle look like? Now moving on to the structural unit of a muscle. We already have learned about the structural unit of bone in our previous lecture, which is osteon. Structural unit of a body is cell. And what is the structural unit of a muscle? It is a muscle fiber. There are few things that you must know about muscle fiber. First is the thickness. Thickness of a muscle fiber can range anywhere between 10 to 100 micrometers, whereas its length can be from 1 to 50 centimeters. It is comparatively very large if you compare it with the thickness. Thickness is in micrometer, while length can be up to 50 centimeters. And most fibers are made up of collagen, and they are having the elastin component, but it is very less. And we know from the previous lecture what are the properties of the collagen fibers, what are the properties of the elastin fiber, how many type of collagen fibers are present in our body, and where they are situated, and what is the function of that. If you have not watched that video, make sure you have watched it before understanding the next concept about the structural stability and mobility function of the muscle. Now you can click the I button which is coming on your screen to go to that lecture and understand it. Now there are some connective tissues which is present in muscle. There are three connective tissues: epimysium, perimysium and endomysium. Here, as you can see in this example, in this figure also, this is a bone in which this is the tendon, and then this is a muscle belly. Bone is attaching with the tendon, and tendon is attaching with the muscle and bone. It is connecting the muscle and bone. The outermost covering of the muscle is known as epimysium. All the muscle fibers are actually wrapped around it, wrapped within it, within this layer, and this layer is called as epimysium. Now if you cut this cross-sectional view, then you will see that then there are so many bundles situated in the muscle. These bundles are nothing but are fascicles. They are known as the fascicles, and these fascicles are wrapped around by a connective tissue which is known as perimysium. Also, you can see that there are some spaces between these fascicles. These spaces are present to provide the passage for the blood vessels and the nerves, so that blood vessels and nerve can actually pass within this conduit which is forming between these two fascicles. Now if you'll go into the fascicle, then you will see there are some muscle fibers present in this fascicle, and this single muscle fiber is having a covering of connective tissue which is endomysium. So let me give you an overview that epimysium is covering the whole muscle, then there is perimysium which is covering the fascicles, and then there is endomysium. This endomysium is actually covering the muscle fiber. Now let's understand the functions of this connective tissue within the muscle. Why are they present? What are the role they are giving in the muscle? So function of the connective tissue first and foremost is to provide the gross structure. If connective tissue would not have been present, muscle would not be present in its gross structure. It helps in providing the structure to muscle so that the muscle fibers are oriented within a specific space. Now second important function of this connective tissue is to provide the space, passage or conduit for the blood vessels and nerves, so that the blood vessels and nerves can be passed within the muscle without any compression coming over them. Third important, I consider this to be a very important function of the connective tissue, which is to generate the passive tension. Muscle has a capacity to produce the tension. If you stretch the muscle, then you will see that the tone of the muscle will increase. This is possible because muscle is having a property which is known as elasticity. In the same way, if you stretch a rubber band, you will see that the rubber band get tensed. If you stretch the muscle, it get tense like the rubber band. What is actually happening over here, that the energy is getting stored in the muscle. When you stretch it, some form of energy is getting stored within the muscle, which is released once you release the force, and this energy is actually helping in regaining the muscle shape after removing the force. If this would not have been possible, then the muscle will not regain its original shape after the removal of the force. So remember, this is a very important thing, that muscle is having the property of elasticity, and this property is coming from these connective tissues. And fourth is to regain the shape. It is the same thing. This is happening because of the property of elasticity, which is coming by this connective tissue, and it conveys, the fifth point is that it conveys the contractile force to the tendon and across the joint. If the muscle fibers are producing the force, the contractile units, your myofilaments, which are actin and myosin, they are producing the contraction, and this contractile force is passing with the help of connective tissues to the tendon. This force is passed to the connective tissue, from the connective tissue it is passed to the tendon, and from the tendon it is transferred to the bone, and then the movement at the bone occurs. So it helps to convey this contractile force to the tendon and across the joint also. I hope I am clear with you guys about the functioning of the connective tissue within muscle. Now let's see the muscle architecture. What are the things that you should know when we will talk about muscle architecture? There are only two things. First is physiological cross-sectional area, and other important thing is pination angle. If you know these two things, then you will get an overview of the muscle architecture. How does the muscle look like and how much force will it produce? You will get a gross idea. First, let's understand about the physiological cross-sectional area. Here you can see there are three examples, A, B and C. These are the pinnate muscle. A is a unipinnate muscle, B is a bipinnate muscle, and here C is a multipinnate muscle. Here you can see this green line is representing the physiological cross-sectional area. In this B diagram also you are able to identify this green line, and here in the C diagram also you are able to identify this green line. So this green line is nothing but the line which is perpendicular to the muscle fiber. You can see this is the line which is perpendicular to the muscle fiber in every case, and it is taken at the point where there is maximum width of the muscle. Where the muscle is most thickest, there the cross-sectional area is taken which is perpendicular to the muscle fiber, which is known as physiological cross-sectional area. More the physiological cross-sectional area, the more is the ability of the muscle to produce the force. This is what it is written in this slide, that physiological cross-sectional is the area which is perpendicular to its fibers, generally at its largest point. More the physiological cross-sectional area, there will be the more force. A fusiform muscle with many thick fibers, if there are thick fibers, will have a greater cross-sectional area than a muscle of similar length. The length is also same, and morphology, which means the other muscle is also fusiform with fewer fibers, which means if there are thick fibers in the muscle and there are thin fibers in the muscle with the thick fiber will be able to produce more force. The muscle is able to produce more force because the physiological cross-sectional area is greater in the muscle which is having these thick muscle fibers. I hope I am clear with you about the physiological cross-sectional area. If it is more, it is directly proportional to the amount of force. The physiological cross-sectional area is more, you have the more capability of producing the force. Now let's understand the muscle architectural point number 2, which is the pination angle. What is a pination angle? It is nothing but angle of orientation between the muscle fiber and tendon. How the fiber and tendon are oriented? What is the angle of insertion of the fiber on the tendon? Because fiber has to attach on the tendon, then only it can connect to the bone. The tendon is helping the muscle and bone to attach. Here you can see this is the central tendon and these are the fibers, and then they are coming and attaching at an angle. Here this angle is represented by the theta, and here this theta is 30 degree. We take the cos component to find out the pination angle. So in cos component, if cos is closer to 0, which means cos is near to 0 degree, cos 0 degree is equals to 1. If the muscle supination angle is close to 0 degree, it will be able to transmit the full force to the tendon. If it is closer to 0 degree, why? Because we are taking the cos component of that angle, because the fibers are attaching to the tendon in an oblique manner. Here you will take the cos component to find out what is the amount that fibers are producing in that particular direction where the tendons are oriented. If it is close to 0 degree, it means the muscle is able to produce more force. The force will not less because it is attaching at an angle. If the fibers are parallel, then this force is maximum. So where the muscles fibers are parallel, they are parallel in the fusiform muscles. So fusiform muscles have a pination angle close to 0 degrees. Now this is what I have explained to you. If a muscle is close to 0 degree, it will give full force to the tendon. Where if the muscle is at 30 degree, then it will be able to transmit 86% of the force. Why? Because cos 30 value is 0.86. This is the reason why it will not be able to transmit the full force. Now pinnate muscles produces greater maximal force than fusiform muscle of similar size. Why this is happening? By orienting the fibers obliquely to the central tendon, a pinnate muscle can fit more fibers to a given length. This example you can see in daily life also. You must have seen the parkings in the mall. There they ask the owner of the car to actually park the car in the oblique direction, not in straight manner. Why? If you will park the car in oblique manner, then it will be able for lot of cars to actually come in that space if you compare that with the parking in a straight line. If the cars are obliquely oriented, it will help in getting more cars in that space. In this same manner, it is possible for muscle to accommodate a lot of muscle fibers when it is oriented into the oblique manner. If the muscle fibers are more, then the maximal force produced will be there in that muscle, because fusiform muscle will accommodate only lesser fibers because it is not obliquely oriented, whereas pinnate muscle will take a lot of fibers, and if the fibers are more, then the amount of force produced will be more. This is what it is written over here. Now there is a scientist. This was all about the architecture of the muscle. Now we are going to understand about the 3-element model. Before knowing about the 3-element model, we acknowledge acknowledge the Archibald Weyhill. He is the only scientist who have received a Nobel Prize for his work done in a sport related research. He did his research in the mechanical work in the muscles. For that he got the Nobel Prize. Hill's 3-element model is the representation of this muscle mechanical response, which we are going to understand in couple of minutes. Now, so this model is actually composed of 3 things, as it is written over here also, 3-element model, which means there are 3 elements in this model. The first element is the contractile element, another element is a series element, and third element is parallel element. What is a contractile element? Contractile elements are the elements in the muscles which are producing the contractile force. So what are the structures that are producing contractile force? They are actin and myosin filaments, myofibrils. These are the contractile elements. Then what is a series element? Series element are actually taken in reference with the muscle belly. They are the elements which are in series with the muscle belly, and they represent the tendon. So whenever I will say series element, it means I am talking about the tendon. Then there are parallel components. Parallel components are the connective tissue which we have learnt in previous slides. These connective tissues are epimysium, perimysium and endomysium. Titin and nebulin are also considered to be a part of this connective tissue. Now there are 3 elements. What are the 3 elements? Contractile element, series element and parallel element. Contractile elements are your actin and myosin, parallel elements are your elastic component, and series elastic components are your tendons. Now let's see what are the functions they are playing in this 3-element model. So elongation or stretch of the whole muscle. If you elongate or stretch the whole muscle, it will lengthen the connective tissue elements. What are the connective tissue elements? These are your epimysium, endomysium and perimysium. The parallel elastic component refers to the connective tissue that surround or lie parallel to the proteins that cause the muscle to contract. And what are the structures that are lying parallel to these proteins which are causing the muscle to contract? They are nothing but your connective tissues, epimysium, perimysium and endomysium. So stretching a muscle by extending a joint elongates both the parallel elastic component and also the series elastic component, because if you are stretching, you are actually elongating the tendon also, which means by generating it helps in generating a spring like resistance in a muscle. This spring like resistance is nothing but is elasticity. The elasticity muscle gets, it comes from the connective tissue majorly and also from the tendon which is stretching while you are stretching the muscle. They are extending if you are stretching the muscle. So the resistance is referred to as passive tension. Now let's understand about the passive length tension curve. We already know that the parallel and series elastic components are stretched within a muscle that results in generating the tension within the muscles. This is happening because of the property of the elasticity which is there in these tissues, especially your parallel component, which are the connective tissues like epimysium, perimysium and endomysium, and series elastic component which is the tendon itself. Now if we plot a graph between this x-axis and y-axis, here this x-axis is represented by the muscle length and y-axis is represented by the tension. So you can see there is linear increase. It is not a linear increase, there is an increase in this fashion. The tension is increasing as the muscle length is increasing, but there is a slack, there is a distance at which by increasing the muscle length tension is not increasing. This is happening because muscle is not stretched till this point. There is the slack of the muscle which is present. After this slack is removed, now muscle is going to lengthen from its original position. This is also known as the critical length. From this critical length, now if you will increase the muscle length, the tension will be increased in this fashion. After reaching the maximum tension, now if you are going to stretch the muscle, the fibers will break down because it cannot tolerate the more tension that you are going to give by increasing the length. So this is the curve that we will get if we plot the graph between the length and tension of a muscle. Remember, this is the passive length, not active length. This is the summary of what we have read till now. Elasticity, we have already discussed about elasticity, how it is generated with the help of connective tissue. A stretched muscle can store a part of energy that created the stretch, and it prevents the muscle from being damaged during elongation, because if the tone is not increasing, then the fibers will get ruptured because they are providing the resistance to this stretch. If this resistance would not have been present, it would definitely will result into the damage of the muscle fibers. So in a way, elasticity is helpful in preventing the damage from elongation. And this elasticity is coming from the connective tissues. These connective tissues are endomysium, perimysium, epimysium, also from the tendon. Now there is one more property in the muscle which is known as viscosity. Viscosity, if I talk about the definition, it is the rate dependent resistance that is encountered between the surface of adjacent fluids. This is the property of the fluid which is present in fluid. So if this is the resistance between the layers of the fluid. As you can see, this is a honey. This is a very viscous material or viscous substance, because the resistance over here present between the two layers of honey is very high. This is why it is hard to do movement over there. If I ask you to swim in a water, in swimming pool, you will be able to do that. But if I ask you to swim in a mud, you won't be able to do that, because there is viscosity in the mud, which is the rate dependent resistance which is present over there. It means that muscle's internal resistance increases with the rate of stretch. If I am going to stretch suddenly, then muscle will generate more force. If I am stretching the muscle very slowly, then the resistance offered by the muscle will be less. This is the reason we physiotherapists oftenly use quick stretch. We give quick stretch to a muscle in order to facilitate that, because muscle is having a property known as viscosity. If the rate of the stretch is very high, then the tension will be very high. If the rate of the stretch is slow, then tension will not be that high. And what is viscosity doing over here? It is helping the muscle from being damaged by a quick and forceful stretch. If I am going to give a quick stretch, viscosity is preventing the damage to the muscle. This is preventing the damage by providing the resistance to this stretch. The more the velocity of the stretch, more is the viscosity and more is the resistance offered by the muscle. I hope this is clear with you. These two are very important property of muscle: elasticity and viscosity. Now we read about the passive length tension curve. Let's understand what is active length tension curve. So active force length tension curve is described by sliding filament model. We have already read about sliding filament model in 12th class. If you have passed the 12th class and now you are part of the first or second year of Bachelor's of Physiotherapy, you must be aware of the sliding filament theory. If you are not, we are going to briefly revise it again. And the active length tension curve is described by this theory, and it has that maximum, it has its maximum at muscle's normal resting length in the body. It simply means that muscle's ability to produce the force is maximum when it is at its normal resting length. As you can see over here in this graph, this is the graph between this force and between the length of the sarcomere. You will see the maximum amount of force is present over here. This is 2 to 3. This is the point. These two dots are the maximum amount of force that muscle can generate. And you will see that this is present at a length which is known as the normal resting length in the body. This is the normal resting length. At this length, there is the most interaction between the actin and myosin filament. This accounts for the largest active force production. If you will increase the length, now you are increasing the length of the sarcomere, you are stretching the muscle. Here you cannot produce a lot of contraction force. If you decrease the length, then also you will not be able to produce a lot of force. In the elbow also, if I extend the elbow and then I will try to flex it, if from the right from the extension, the muscle generation capacity is not that high, because at that position muscle is not at its resting length. So it is very important to know that muscle's capacity of producing the force is maximum when it is at its normal resting length, and this is what is depicted in this curve. This is known as active length tension curve. This is different from the passive length tension curve which we read in the previous slides. Now at longer length, what happens? So when the length is longer, the muscle is having the lesser opportunity to form the cross bridge. If the opportunity of forming the cross bridge is low, therefore the force production will be less. As the muscle decreases in the length, now the muscle is decreased in the length, so what is happening over here is the length past the resting length in the filament becomes more closely packed. Now what is happening? Your myofilaments, actin and myosin filaments are very closely packed and are able to form only few bridges because there is less space. So there are no spaces to form the cross bridge. It is optimal for the muscle to produce the force when it is at its resting length. Maximum force will be produced at the resting length because it offers the maximum amount of cross bridge formation. So remember, this is what we get to know from active length tension curve, that maximum force is present whenever the resting length of the muscle is present. This is different completely from the passive length tension curve. Now, because muscle is not acting only actively or passively, both the forces are coming into the picture. So we have to look the whole picture in this way. We are going to look the whole scenario, how it is acting. So we must understand about this total length tension curve. This is again formed between the tension and the length. Now we are increasing the length and seeing how this curve is taking place. This black line, as you can see over here, it is depicting the total force. Now as the length is increasing, this force producing capacity is increasing. The muscle is in the contracted, maximally contracted state over here. Muscle is now increasing in length. Now tension is also increasing. Now tension is also increasing. Just focus on this black line. Now the muscle has reached its maximum force production capacity over here. Now you see there is a dip over there in black line, and after this dip, then again the tension is increasing with the length. This is the summation of the active length tension curve and passive length tension curve. How it is happening? Now focus on this gray line. This is actually depicting the active forces generated by the muscle. So here the muscle is in this short position, and here the muscle is in lengthened position. So this is the optimal position where the muscle can produce the force. So as you can see the graph, after coming from here, there is decline in the force, but this decline in the force is actually managed by the other component, which is passive tension. This red line is depicting the passive tension in the muscle. So that force, active force is decreasing over here, but this passive force started to increase, because we know whenever we stretch the muscle, the tension is increasing because of this property of elasticity provided by the parallel elastic component and the series elastic component, which is the tendon and your connective tissues. Now the length is increasing and tension is increasing. So this is how the black curve is achieved over here by the summation of this gray and red curve. Gray is your active force curve and red is your passive tension curve. This is why we are getting a dip over here, because here the passive forces are just increasing. They are not much to take the tension. After the passive tension is generated, now the total force is again started to rise. This is how we can understand the total length tension curve. I hope it is cleared with you what is a passive tension curve, what is the active tension curve, and what is total length tension curve. Now we must know about isometric force in order to understand how the muscle is actually providing the stabilization. Muscle is able to provide the stabilization by producing this isometric force. We know muscle can be contracted in an isotonic manner or isometric manner. Isotonic is your eccentric or concentric forces, and isometric is your forces in which the muscle is not changing its length. In eccentric, muscle is lengthening, and in concentric, muscle is shortening. So muscle is producing the stabilization by producing these isometric forces. Now there is torque versus joint angle curve. What is a torque versus joint angle curve? So over here you can see this x-axis is depicting the joint angle. The range of motion that can be present in elbow for flexion is 120 degrees. So this x-axis is depicting the range of motion. Now what is y-axis? This y-axis is showing the torque producing capacity, and I am very sure that you right now know what is torque from our previous lectures, and what is internal torque and what is the significance of internal torque. If you have not watched that video, you can go and understand by clicking on this I button that you are getting in this screen right now. There are two graphs. This is for elbow flexor and this is for hip abductors. Elbow flexors are providing the elbow flexion torque, and hip abductors are providing the hip abduction torque. Now it is important to actually appreciate that the maximum force in the first curve is produced at this angle, which is around between 60 to 80 degrees, and the maximum force in this graph is produced at the 0 degrees, or it is minus 10 degrees, which means that muscle have the force producing capacity different at different angles. There are so many factors which accounts for it that we will be understanding now. So we must know that for a muscle to act, it can produce maximum force at a certain angle. If it is elbow flexor, it can produce maximum force between 60 to 80 degrees, and if it is a hip abductor, they can produce maximum force at 0 degrees or minus 10 degree of adduction. Every muscle is having its own unique graph. We must appreciate every muscle, because every muscle is placed very differently in our body according to the purpose it is going to provide. Why it is different, that we are getting the different torque at different angle? So two factors are responsible for that. First is muscle length changes as the joint angle changes. You know that muscle has ability to produce the maximum amount of force at its resting length. If it goes below the resting length or above the resting length, the force producing capacity will decrease. So it can have the optimal resting length at a particular angle. So this is the very first reason why the torque angle curve is like this. The second important thing is lever arm or leverage, of which we have talked already. We have talked a lot very much detail in our previous lectures. In lever video I have explained in very detail what is internal moment arm and why it is important for a muscle. If you have not watched that, you can just go and check that video in our playlist. So lever arm, if the internal moment arm is increased, which means that muscle's torque producing capacity will increase. So this internal moment arm is the distance between the effort and fulcrum. Over here the fulcrum is the joint and internal, and the what is the effort? Effort is the point of the insertion. So if the distance between these 2 points is increasing, which means that the muscle's torque ability capacity will increase. If this distance is decreasing, then the muscle's torque producing capability will decrease also. So these two factors are majorly responsible for the torque angle curve. What are these two factors? First is that the muscle length changes as the joint angle changes. Second is that lever arm or leverage changes with the joint angle. So you must be aware of this. So this is why we are getting this type of curve. Now let's understand about what is happening at the biceps. So this is the A figure depicting the extension of the elbow, and this is the B figure which is depicting the flexion of the elbow. Over here the elbow is at 90 degrees, roughly at 90 degrees of flexion. So here the muscle length is decreasing, but the moment arm is increasing. And we know from our diagram, from the total, see this diagram, if the length is increasing, then the tension is increasing. But over here the length is decreasing, but still the tension is increasing. This is increasing because there is increase in the muscle moment arm. You can see this is the shorter line and this is a longer line. If the moment arm is more, then the torque producing capacity will be more. So this we must be aware of. Its shape yields very important function, very important information about physiological and mechanical factors that determine the torque. So there are physiological factors also and there are mechanical factors also that determine the torque. So as I told you earlier also, that shape of maximal effort torque angle curve is very specific to each muscle group. Every muscle has its own torque angle curve. So I talked about mechanical and physiological variable. Now let's understand what are these variables, because these two are responsible for torque producing capacity. So let's take first example in which mechanical, this is the part of the mechanical component in which we are increasing the internal moment arm, and the clinical example of it is by the surgical displacement of the greater trochanter to increase the internal moment arm of the hip abductor muscles. What we are doing is we are displacing the greater trochanter so that we can increase the internal moment arm of hip abductor muscles. So what is happening? The internal moment arm, the decrease in the amount of force amount of muscle force required, because here you have increased the torque. Now as the moment arm is increased, so muscle has to produce lesser torque in order to do the same work that it was doing earlier with the lesser effort. And what can be the possible clinical consequence of it? The decreased hip abductor force can reduce the force generated across an unstable or painful hip joint. It is considered as a means of protecting a joint from damaging forces, because hip abductor force is increased, which means that the compressive forces at the joint will decrease now, because hip abductor is not acting aggressively, which will result in decreasing the inflammatory processes and protecting the joint from these damaging forces. So this is how we can understand what are the mechanical and physiological variables that we can change in order to produce or in order to alter this internal torque. These are all the other examples like patelectomy, or this is also a type of mechanical variable change. If patella is actually acting as anatomical pulley, it is increasing the moment arm. If it is damaged or it is removed, then the knee extensor force will be increased, that will damage the knee joint. So they were two examples of the mechanical variable. Now understand about the physiological variable. If the muscle activation is decreased, how it can be decreased? This can be decreased, for example, the damage of the deep portion of the peroneal nerve. what it will result into, it will decrease the strength of the dorsiflexor muscles, because the peroneal nerve is going to supply the dorsiflexor muscles. So this, it reduces your ability to walk safely. The physiological thing is changing over here. So this is how you can understand how the mechanical and physiological variables are important in determining the internal torque or altering the internal torque. Now all the things that we read till now were able to give the insight how muscle is able to provide the stabilization. We read about the shape of the muscle, we read about the 3-element model, we read about the viscosity and elasticity property of the muscle. Most importantly, we read about how muscles are producing the isometric force, and this isometric force is actually resulting in providing the stabilization. Also important topic what we did get insight about that was total active length tension curve, active length tension curve and passive length tension curve. That was very important in determining how the muscle's ability of producing the tension decreases or increases by the change of the length. This was all about the stability function of the muscle. Now let's focus on how the muscle is a skeletal mover, how it is able to move the bone. It is able to move the bone by the modulation force, and this modulation force is produced by concentric or eccentric activation. And how the stabilization force was produced? It was produced by the isometric force. And how the skeletal mover force is produced? This is produced by concentric or eccentric activation. This is known as, there is something which is known as force velocity relationship, how the force is changing with the lengthening or shortening velocity. That we will understand by this diagram or this figure. So focus on this figure right now. Here you can see this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. The y-axis over here is represented by the force and x-axis by the velocity. On the left hand side the muscle is lengthening, so it is lengthening velocity, and on the right hand side it is the shortening velocity. Now what is happening over from here, if the lengthening velocity is increasing, the force is increasing. If the shortening velocity is increasing, the force is decreasing. Fine. I'll give you a real life example to understand it better. So imagine you have to do the flexion of the elbow to lift a dumbbell, and if the dumbbell is of very low weight, you will be able to do that very quickly. You will do this, you are able to flex that. Why you are able to flex that? If you are doing a concentric action and you are able to do that with a large velocity, because what, the weight is less. As I will increase the weight, now I will increase your weight, now it is hard for you to lift, because you will not be able to lift from this now. It will take time, because as the concentric force has increased, this velocity will actually decrease. Fine. Now the force will try to make the muscle is not able to do that force, and the velocity is lessened. Now reverse this example. Now you have to do the eccentric contraction of the biceps. Now you have to take it down. If the weight is less, you will take it very slowly, easily. But if the weight is more, then you will just drop it. Why it is happening? Because the muscle's demand of force production is increased and muscle is not able to do that. So the velocity will increase. So remember these two things. The concentric activation, in concentric activation, amount of force is always directly proportional to the velocity. The more the velocity, more the amount of force muscle can produce. In eccentric activation, the amount of force production is always inversely proportional to the velocity. If the amount of force is more, then the velocity will be less. So please remember this thing in order to understand the force velocity relationship. Now the second thing is activating the muscle via the nervous system, because the muscle has to be activated from the central nervous system in order to act. And how this is happening, that we will be understanding in the couple of slides. Before that, we must be aware of motor unit. What is a motor unit? So motor unit is nothing, it is alpha motor neuron and the muscle fibers which is innervated by that. alpha motor neuron is called the motor unit. Over here you can see this is the alpha motor neuron and this is the muscle fiber this nerve is supplying. So these muscle fibers and this alpha motor neuron, this nerve is actually called a motor unit. And if you combine all these things, then they will be called together as a motor unit. What is happening over here is that excitation of alpha motor neuron occurs. These excitation may come from many sources. A lot of sources can excite the alpha motor neuron. This excitation can come from the alpha afferent, from the spinal interneurons, from the cortical descending neurons. From those all the sources excitation will come. Now two things will happen for modulation of force. First is recruitment and another thing is rate coding or sequential activation. This is how muscle will be producing the force. First it will recruit the motor neurons, motor units, and then the sequential activation or rate coding will occur. And what are these terms? These are very simple terms that we will be understanding in the couple of next slides. Now first of all, understand the muscle fiber activation. I hope you are all aware of these things that I am going to describe right now, because this is a part of basic science that you have read in 12th class, also in first class when it was you were reading about the physiology. These might have come, how the nerve is actually transmitting the impulses at the neuromuscular junction. If you do not remember that we can revise right now. Okay, this is a brief revision of that topic, that how the muscle fiber is activated. So first of all, action potential is initiated and propagated down to a motor axon. Action potential generate, it goes to a motor axon. From the motor axon, acetylcholine are released, which is a neurotransmitter from the axon terminal at the neuromuscular junction. Now this acetylcholine will bind to the receptor sites which are present on the motor end plate. Acetylcholine will go and bind to this motor end plate. Now sodium and potassium ion will enter and depolarize the muscle membrane. Depolarization will occur. This will occur how? The sodium and potassium ions from outside will enter into the muscle, which will cause the muscle membrane to depolarize. Now this muscle action potential will propagate to the membrane surface. From the membrane surface, from the propagation from the membrane surface, it will travel from this surface of the membrane and will go to the transverse tubules. Now transverse tubule will depolarize, they will cause the release of calcium ions surrounding the myofibrils. So action potential has come, it has released the acetylcholine has binded, it has produced the depolarization. Now this depolarization has reached to the transverse tubule, and from the transverse tubule calcium ion is released. Now this calcium ion will go and bind to the troponin. This will lead to release of inhibition over actin-myosin binding. Now what will be happening? The actin-myosin bridge will be occurring. And how this will occur? Actin will combine with the myosin and ATP, which is an energy providing molecule. This will be released to produce the movement of myosin cross bridges. The stroking or the power stroking will be occurring. Thick and thin filaments will be sliding relative to each other. This is what is called as sliding filament theory. If you are not aware of that, you must read the sliding filament theory in detail for understanding it better. Now after the sliding has been occurred, this actin and myosin bond will be broken and it is re-established if the calcium concentration remains sufficiently high. This was all about the activation, how the activation is occurring. So this is the very first part of the recruitment. Now to understand the recruitment in a better way, we must be aware of this Hahnemann size principle. What is this principle? This principle allows for orderly recruitment of motor units. There will be a order in recruitment of this motor unit. And how this order will be decided? This order will be decided specifically by the size, which allows for the smooth and controlled force development, because we want that the muscles should produce the force in a smooth and controlled way. What this principle states is that smaller motor neurons will be recruited before the large motor neurons. So before the large motor neurons are activated, it will be the smaller motor neurons that will be recruited or activated from that impulse. So What, let's understand about this. So over here in this diagram also you can see this is the force production on x-axis, and this is the y, this is depicted by the recruitment threshold. The recruitment threshold for this these fibers, these motor units are less. These are called as type 1 motor units, and these are type 2 motor units. The recruitment threshold or the threshold of the impulse needed to recruit these type of motor units is very large. Now let's first understand about type 1 type of motor units or muscle fiber. So we already know that about collagen fibers. They are also of two types. Type 1, although collagen, there are 12 types of collagen fibers present in our body, but we majorly divide them into type 1 and type 2. Now there are muscle fibers also. They are also again differentiated into two parts, which is type 1 and type 2. First is type 1 is also called as slow oxidative muscle fibers. These muscle fibers are connected with smaller motor neurons and have twitch responses that are long in duration. Remember, their twitch response, or it is the contraction. Their contraction is long in duration but low in amplitude. But means they contract for a longer duration, but the strength of that contraction is not high. Whereas type 2 fibers, they are also called as fast and easily fatigued or fast and glycolytic. These muscle fibers are connected with large motor neurons. So here they were connected with smaller motor neurons, and they are connected with the large motor neurons. These type 2 are of two types, type 2A and type 2B. Type 2A are called as fast and glycolytic, and type 2B are called as fast and easily fatigued. The force producing capacity will be maximum in these type 2B fibers, but their duration will be very less, while this fast glycolytic will be in between this type 2B and type 1, means their duration will not be very less or very high, and their strength will also be in moderate duration. This will not be very high like of the slow fibers, or not be very low as we compare it with the other type 2B fibers. So they are in between the type 2 and type 2B and type 1 fibers. That we can understand better by the coming examples also. Now let's see over here. If you are walking, which over in the walking slow twitch fibers, if I ask you to walk, the slow twitch fibers will be acting more. Now if you are running, then your intermediate muscle fibers, which are your type 2A, will be acting more. And if you are sprinting, then your fast twitch fibers or these fast and easily fatigued fibers will be acting. They are also known as fast twitch fiber, and these fast and glycolytic are also known as intermediate muscle fiber, and this slow oxidative muscle fibers are also known as slow twitch muscle fibers. This is an example. Here you can understand it better. These are the slow oxidative, and this is your fast and glycolytic, and this is your fast and fatigued. Over here, this is the duration curve. This is the most important thing that you must know. Over here in the slow fibers, the duration is very high, but the amplitude is less. In this type 2B fibers, the duration is very less, but the amplitude or the strength of the contraction is high. Whereas in these fibers, type 2A fibers, it is in between the type 2B and type 1 fibers. Now this was all about the recruitment, how the recruitment was happening. Recruitment was happening by the activation of the alpha motor neuron, and then this principle, Henman-Saiz principle, was followed, and the orderly recruitment of motor units were occurring. First smaller motor units, then the large motor units were taking part in the contraction. We also read about the muscle fiber type. They can be type 1 or type 2. They can be differentiated into type 1 and type 2, and type 2 is again can be divided into type 2A and type 2B. Now understand the second important thing, which is responsible for the muscle to act as a mobilizer. This is rate coding or sequential activation. So after a specific motor neuron is recruited, muscle force is modulated, because after recruiting the motor neuron, you have to modulate the force, because if you are writing with the pen, you need lesser force. But if you are doing a boxing, or if you are doing or lifting a weight, you need more force. So modulation of force is important by increase in the rate of its excitation. If you have to increase the force, then excitation rate also has to be increased. This modulation is called as rate coding. after the motor neurons are activated, you have to decide what is the amount of force that must be generated to do that to do that task, to do the purpose. So this is decided by the rate coding or sequential activation. Now we will understand that. So now single action potential lasts only for 1 to 2 milliseconds, and a muscle, the action potential lasts only for 1 to 2 milliseconds, and muscle contraction or twitch will last for 130 milliseconds if it is a slow fiber in which the duration is very high. So it can be up to maximum of 130 ms, 130 millisecond. So if the twitch duration, it is possible for within this duration, it is possible for the other action potentials to generate or to come. So it is possible for the other twitches to come within this duration of 130 milliseconds, because it is a very long duration. So if a fiber is allowed to relax completely, if there is a twitch, it happened and it came down, then other twitch has come and down. As you can see in this diagram also, there is a twitch which has increased and then it is decreased. If a fiber is allowed to relax completely before the subsequent action potential, second fiber twitch generates equivalent force to the first twitch. This is the second fiber is recruited and this is producing the same amount of force. This is producing the same amount of force because the first one has been relaxed completely, then the other one is coming. The other one is not coming in between the twitch duration of the first one. So this is why we are getting this type of graph, and this is the type of graph that we get in the isometric force, and by the time this is decreasing because the fatigue is occurring in the muscle. You cannot hold that contraction for a long duration because muscle will get fatigued. It will not be able to produce the force. This is the graph that we get in isometric forces. If just consider another scenario in which if next action potential arrives before the preceding twitch has relaxed. So the first twitch has not relaxed and the another muscle twitch has arrived, then the summation will occur. Then the summation will occur. Summation means that their amplitude will increase. The amplitude of both the forces will be increased. As you can see over here, this is the type of isometric contraction. First contraction is coming, first is relaxing, then the other is coming. The first is doing this and the other is coming. But from over here, the second one has come within the duration of the first contraction. So the amplitude is summating, it is increasing, then it is increasing. But still, from this you can see this is a unfused tetanus and this is a tetanization. This is fused tetanus. What is the difference between unfused and fused tetanus? Tetanus means sustained contraction. Now unfused tetanus means there is still a duration, there is a time gap between the end of one twitch and the coming of the other one. They are not showing the graph as a single contraction, but the summation has occurred to the, if the summation has occurred to the level that both of these summates to look as a single contraction, then this is called as a tetanization. As you can see, the curve, there is a roughness in the curve over here, but here this has become smooth. This has become smooth. There are lesser curves up and down, there are lesser troughs over here. So this is the tetanization. This is fused tetanus and this is unfused tetanus. This was all about the muscle modulation, how the muscle is able to produce the force. First of all, in this lecture, we read about how muscle is providing the stabilization. We read about the stabilization things, and then we learned about how muscle is providing the mobilization. So for that, we studied first about the muscle, how muscle is providing a skeletal mover. We understood the force velocity relationship. Then we understood the concentric activation, how it is occurring, eccentric how it is occurring in relation with the velocity. We knew how the motor unit is acting and what are the recruitment steps and are the rate coding or sequential activation. This completes the muscles function of mobility and stability. Now it is also important to discuss about fatigue, because you have also seen in your real life, you must have encountered this thing, fatigue. What is a fatigue? By the definition, it means there is a decline in the muscle force under conditions of stable activation. Activation is stable, but muscle is unable to produce the force. This is called as the muscle fatigue. Normally, nervous system compensates for muscular fatigue by either increasing the rate of activation or recruiting the assisting motor units. So this is the implication of what you have learned in the previous slides. what it is saying that if the fatigue is occurring, so nervous system will compensate for that. How the nervous system will compensate for that? Nervous system can increase the rate of activation, which is rate coding or sequential activation. Or what nervous system can do? It can recruit the motor units. If the number of motor units are high, then the force of contraction will be high. So this is how the nervous system compensates for the fatigue. Now, fatigue can be divided into two types: central fatigue and peripheral fatigue. What is a central fatigue? If the psychological factors are involved, such as sense of effort, or neurophysiological factors such as a descending control over interneurons and motor neurons located in the spinal cord. If these all things are involved, central nervous system is involved, this means the cause of fatigue is central, psychological. So this is why you will see the coaches will motivate the athletes to push themselves beyond the limit, because they want to eliminate the possibility of central fatigue by motivating the individual. Now let's understand what is a peripheral fatigue. Peripheral fatigue may result from the neurophysiological factors. So neurophysiological factors come in the picture, and they are related to action potential propagation. How the action potential is traveling in the motor nerves and transmission of activation to the muscle fibers. Repeated action of motor units can result in gradual reduction of ACH release. If the ACH is less, then the depolarization will be less, and there will be lesser release of calcium ion, and the sliding filament theory or the sliding between the actin and myosin will not be occurring. Other factors are also responsible, like the decrease in the pH, or increase in the H+ content in the fibers, the deposition of the lactate. All these things are cause of the peripheral fatigue. So this was all about the central and peripheral fatigue. Now we have completed this lecture, and I hope you must have got the insight about how muscle is providing the stability, mobility, and what is fatigue and what are the types of fatigue. Thank you everyone. If you have any doubt, you can always ask in the comment section or can mail to us. Thank you so much.